Welcome to Access FSU, the podcast for the Office of Accessibility Services at Florida State University. Your hosts are Accessibility Specialist Shannon Bernick and Accessible Technology Coordinator KimBoo York. We are here to shine a solutions-oriented spotlight on issues and concerns for university students of all levels, including undergraduate, graduate, postgraduate, and non-degree seeking. Thank you for joining us. Welcome back to Access FSU. We are on episode 5, and this is a special episode focused on Pride Month. And we're recording it during Pride Month. And quite frankly, I'm a little embarrassed because I didn't think to make this a topic. Shannon actually came in last week, a week ago, and was like, hey, we should do something for Pride Month. And I thought, as somebody who is queer and identifies as bisexual myself, dang, I should have thought of that. But I didn't. Shannon did. And now we're here. We're going to try to get this edited and up before the end of the month is out. And once again, I got a sneak peek at the questions that Shannon has put together. And as always, they're very thoughtful and thought-provoking. So I'm really looking forward to the dialogue that we're going to have here today. We have two guests. We have Beth and Carla. I'm just going to say their names real quick, but Shannon's going to introduce them to you in a couple of seconds here. I'm really liking the blend, though. I'm just going to say this, Shannon, because we've got me, and I'm in my 50s, and we've got Carla, who's in her 20s, and we have Beth, who is, as far as I can tell, timeless. So, so we're going to have a range of experiences to talk about this, and I've pretty much been out my whole life, lived through the 80s and the 90s, and then we have some of the more recent perspectives coming into this. So I think it's going to be a real interesting dialogue that we have here today. One thing I do want to advise listeners is a content warning. Based on some of the questions that we have, we may be bringing up issues that are sensitive or upsetting to some of you who are listening in right now. We are here for Pride Month. We're here to be proud of our community and our history, but the history also has a lot of negative aspects to it, not just in violence, up to and including murder and suicide, but psychological issues and mental health, especially currently with our transgender siblings. There's a lot of violence out there, not just outside of the community, but even sometimes, unfortunately, within it. So if you feel uncomfortable, if you're not up to continuing listening, we remind you can hit the stop button. We'll have transcripts available. We'll have it with captions on YouTube so that you won't have to actually listen. So there's a lot of ways that you can engage with this material without harming yourself. So we certainly don't want to do that. So Shannon, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our guests and to get into the talking.
So I actually can't entirely take credit for today's podcast. Carla came to me and she said, hey, what are we doing for Pride Month? And so we had a great conversation about an awareness campaign on our social media sites. And then I said, hey, I think this would be a really great topic for our podcast as well. And that's when I reached out to Beth, who our audience is familiar with because she has our most popular podcast to date, which was when we talked about the intersectionality of gender and disability for Women's History Month in February. So Beth Thompson is our sexual health coordinator from the Center for Health and Wellness here on campus and has just been a tremendous asset and resource for us, especially for our podcasts. And then we also have Carla joining us, who is our program assistant here at the OAS. And I'm sorry, Beth. I said the wrong pronoun. Do you want to go back and redo it?
Yeah, let's start over with the introduction for Beth.
Okay. So not the part about Carla and I having the conversation?
Okay. No, just the introduction with Beth. Yeah, we can. That part's fine.
Okay. So
we all just need more coffee today, I think.
Okay, great. Okay, so many of you have already been introduced to Beth Thompson. They are the sexual health coordinator here at the Center for Health and Wellness on campus, and they have been a tremendous asset for us both on our podcast and also have partnered with us for other events in the past. So in February, our most popular podcast with Beth was about the intersectionality of gender and disability. And so we thought it would be great to bring they back today to talk about the intersectionality of sexual orientation and gender identity, as well as disability. And then Carla is joining us as our program assistant at the OAS. So many of you might know her from coming into the office. And of course, as I said, she gets credit for the idea for doing something for Pride Month today. And she is a tremendous advocate for LGBTQ and disability rights. And we're really excited to have her joining the MSW program at FSU because we know she's going to be a great asset to
Woohoo!
our profession.
Thank you.
So, with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and do a brief introduction of our topic today. As I mentioned, we'll be talking about the intersectionality of sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the topic of intersectionality, it does refer to the interconnectedness of social identities such as race, class, and gender. And these are regarded as creating an interwoven discrimination or privilege that's experienced by the individual. And of course, this is particularly important to marginalized groups, such as those who experience a disability or those who identify as LGBTQ, because it's important to promoting equity in terms of resources and access for those members. And one of the most recent research that's been done is part of the Movement Advancement Project. We did post this to our Instagram site. It's a tremendous infographic that just really summarizes the research that has been done. And it shows that members of the LGBTQ community experience disability more often than those who do not identify with a disability. And of course, they face many inequities because of this. So while they may have a community or resources that are LGBTQ inclusive, those might not be fully accessible in terms of ADA services or vice versa. Of course, we know that there's barriers to employment where those who experience a disability have lower employment rates. And this can often be compounded by also identifying as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And then, of course, we know that those who identify as a member of the LGBTQ community or who experience a disability are also overrepresented in our juvenile and criminal justice systems. So there's a lot of inequities that need to be obviously more research done, and then more programs and social awareness campaigns in order to address those inequities. So with that all in mind, we're going to go ahead and just open up some questions for Beth and Carla to give us, what their experience has been both professionally and personally. And so we're going to start with a topic that we actually covered in our podcast on the intersectionality of sex and disability. And we talked about how there's this misconception that persons with disabilities are often viewed as not being as sexual. And that misconception is often compounded when a person identifies as female. And so we'd like to just open up the conversation by talking about what misconceptions surround persons with disabilities in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity.
Such a great question. I think it's important just to give the listeners an idea of, since we are talking about disability specifically, to share my identities within the disabled community, in that I have a lot of invisible disabilities. And so sometimes I'm going to talk about those who have more visible disabilities, and that's coming from a place of amplifying what my friends and activists have said. So I hope no one feels as if I'm speaking over those with more visible disabilities. But I have ADHD, I'm losing my hearing, and I'm hard of hearing. And I also have a chronic fatigue syndrome. So if I decide to take a nap mid podcast, I hope everyone will forgive me.
We'll work around it. Don't worry.
Okay. So some of the misconception is that we talked about it in that first podcast is that people who are visibly disabled are seen as asexual, not sexual, not interested in sex, which is not true. And then it gravitates to once people accept that people might be interested in sex, they start asking really invasive questions like, well, how do you do it? That's a lot to just be asking people. And then they sometimes still infantilize that person experiencing desire, like, oh, it's so cute that you have a crush, when that person's like, it's not a crush, I have this long-term romantic relationship. Or they misrepresent in their own minds the people who are looking in a caregiver relationship or a partnership is, oh, your partner must sacrifice so much to take care of you, as if not every relationship is about sacrificing and taking care of your partner in some capacity. It just looks different for different people. If you're in a relationship with someone who has ADHD or anything with executive dysfunction, you're going to have to, as a partner, help them accommodate that. And so when it comes to gender, most people are already perceived as cisgender in some capacity. And so we do see from that study you mentioned a greater gender variance among the disabled community. And there's some really cool theories as to why that is, including that because they already feel othered by society, it's easier to step away from traditional gender roles and traditional gender identities. When we say traditional, we mean white colonial traditional, not indigenous or other traditional. And then we've talked about how trans people get invasive questions too of, well, what's in your pants? Lint in my pocket, probably. Why do you want to know?
Mm.
And when it comes to combining that with disability, you get people who are saying, oh, well, I don't believe you have this invisible illness, asking invasive questions. Well, if you say you have it, can you prove it? Can you prove you're really disabled? Can you prove you're really transgender? Can you prove you're really sexual? And putting a lot of burden on proof of people who have these multiple identities. And some people may even assume that your queerness or your transness is because of your disability, or your disability is because of your queerness and your transness, which is a weird jump to get to for some people. So those are just some of my thoughts on how the two kind of layer in when it comes to misconceptions.
I hadn't really thought about that connection, Beth, of, blaming somebody like, oh, well, you're disabled because you're trans, or you're trans because, but it does seem that there's a lot of victimizing, victim blaming, um, putting the onus onto other people for who they are and what they are, as opposed to just accepting that. So that's a very interesting insight. I hadn't really put that together myself.
Sorry. Yeah, just like Beth, I do want to state that I do have a lot of invisible disabilities and am a lesbian. And I want to talk a little bit about my internalization of what we're talking about, because for a really long time I thought I was asexual, which is a total legitimate identity, obviously. But I was convinced that, because I had all these like disappointing experiences in my life, that I was actually ace, and that, I was not interested in this kind of um, activities, sexual activities, and all of that. So it took me a while to actually realize that I was just simply gay, to try that out. And then, just like how you were saying, I have a lot of friends who experience things like being asked like what their name is, and then they tell them their name, and if it's gender neutral, they're like, is that your birth name, like what was it, so that they can, in reality they just want to know what their genitals are. Like that's simply what people want to know. And then they like get super like defensive if you try to say like, well, why do you want to know these things, like because obviously you're asking them. And then with when it comes to my disabilities and medical conditions, I think it definitely is all related. And it just took me so long to come to the realization that I should go and get evaluated and get diagnosed and all these things, because I simply thought that I was just like completely abnormal, like no one else in the world is like me and has been going through these experiences. But finding my chosen family, really, that I can relate to, in all of these things, and being LGBTQ and being disabled, just helped me tremendously. um, so yeah, that's very important, to talk about these things and to surround yourself with people that also experience those kinds of things.
Yeah, and I like, Carla, you mentioned two things there. Number one is the normalization, right? Like, people, there's common experiences among people who have similar diagnoses. And oftentimes we think, oh my goodness, that behavior is so abnormal, when in fact it's a completely normal reaction to either an abnormal experience, such as trauma, or to just your genetic disposition, So I think that normalization piece is so important that we talk about that. And then also, the second thing you talked about leads right into the next question we had, which was that issue of visibility, right? Because we know many persons who experience a disability experience a hidden disability. So we can't necessarily see that just by looking at the person. And of course, although we live in a society that tends to judge a book by its cover, we can't tell a person's sexual orientation or even their gender identity solely based on their appearances as well. So, how do you feel that these hidden identities can best be communicated within the context of either a friendship and familial relationship? Even sadly, they still come up in the workplace, and then of course within a more intimate sexual relationship.
So I don't remember if I mentioned I'm also queer, gender queer, queer sexuality, just queer all over the place. But when it comes to sharing either of these identities or the combination of these identities, the first thing you really have to do is gauge your safety. Because sometimes while living your truth and living out is really great, your safety is also important. And there's going to be times you have to pause your coming out, or even sometimes retract your coming out. And that's really hard with both your sexuality and your disability. We know that some people still, if they find out someone in their life has autism, they start recommending ABA, or applied behavioral analysis therapy, which is incredibly harmful and has been spoken about from many autistics and autistic communities, saying this is harmful, please stop. And so if you say that to someone, are they going to start recommending therapy that's not helpful? Instead of like therapy that's helpful, they're going to recommend this harmful therapy. Or if you tell someone that doesn't believe in non-binary genders, are they going to try and convert you back, or just ignore your who you are? But once you gauge your safety, knowing how that person receives information is important. I think a really kind of easy, gentle method is to find media, whether it's TikTok, YouTube, or even a TV show or a movie that has an identity like yours or has an experience like yours. Watch it with that person and be like, hey, what if that was me? Or like, it me? Or, there's all sorts of fun ways to say those things. TikTok's made it really easy because so many people are realizing that their experiences are not just for them. And that's been a really cool thing to witness. But that's one way as well. Some people prefer to write a letter and be like, hey, this is new information. I'm going to slide this into your email, or just leave it on the kitchen table and either sit here while you read it, or I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave this here and leave. Different people process things differently. I find sending if you have spoons and energy to gather it, a resource or two, especially if you're introducing something really unfamiliar. For a long time, people didn't believe that people assigned female at birth could have ADHD, or it was super rare. But we're knowing that it just presents differently, and that people assigned female are also treated differently when it comes to the behaviors that they would have been exhibiting. So the hyperactive behavior is not bouncing their foot; it's their notes are covered in doodles and looks like some sort of abstract art piece with some words in it. But I also, instead of saying just Google, I encourage people to give a resource, because when you Google my grandkids trans, one of the top not responses, results, thank you, is really transphobic and horrifying.
Wow, that is so depressing.
It's because I came out to my grandparents as trans over Christmas, and when I was putting those resources together for them, I found this specific one and I was reading it, and it was like, sometimes you just need to accept that this is a phase your kid or your grandkid is going through. And I was like, if it's a phase, I've been going through it for 30 years and I really need it to, figure itself out. And so the final recommendation I have with both is set a boundary if you need to, and say whether, because you know your life, you know your experiences, and you know what you need. So if someone continues to say that's not real, or I don't want to do this for you, this includes asking for a reasonable accommodation from people in your life or your workplace. You can say, well, this is my truth, this is my experience, and you can either respect it and follow things X, Y, and Z, or we can have a minimal or no relationship depending on if it's workplace versus family versus friend group. And this can be like, if you may not believe in trans issues, but you're going to call me by my chosen name, or I'm not going to answer. Or if it's, hey, person in my life, I need you to not take down my notes I put on the wall to remember how to do this thing that I get executive dysfunction for. And they continue to take it down. That's a boundary they're violating. And so set those boundaries. You deserve boundaries, because boundaries are your way of keeping relationships. And if people can't respect them, that means they don't respect you. And that's really hard.
Beth, you pointed out something there. You talked about just that there can be a danger in just Googling resources, right? Because we know that conversion camps are still out there and people pay good money, especially to send their children who may be transitioning, and they will send their children to conversion camps, which can do a tremendous amount of harm to the child's overall emotional and psychological well being. So it is so important when you do Google those resources to make sure that you follow that up by Googling some of the academic research as well. There is Google Scholar that will also help learn about some of the research that's been done on those resources so that you know if they're trustworthy or not.
And I'd also like to jump in as well and talk about the safety issue, because growing up and being out in the 80s as I was a very unusual person back then, especially in the more rural South. And there's just so many levels to that. And I really appreciate, Beth, that you pointed that out first, because there are certainly situations where, coming out is the best thing you can do for visibility, for representation. But it's also, there's some really dangerous times when it's just not recommended to put yourself in a position of, being homeless, being hurt by somebody, or just being disowned. So a lot of those issues are very, very real, even in this day and age. So I just wanted to thank you and put that out there. It's a historic problem, much less than it used to be, at least in our country, in the USA, in that time when I was younger, but also still very real. So didn't mean to talk over you, Carla. So,
Oh, of course.
sorry.
It's fine. It's totally fine. Yeah. No, what you were talking about is extremely important. Like, I go through that every day, especially living in the South, like going out camping in the middle of nowhere. And, you see these trucks with certain bumper stickers on them. It's just me and my girlfriend. So we have to be like super careful when we enter those situations. And I also want to, I guess, it was super poignant. That's a word, right? What Beth was talking about setting boundaries, because boundaries literally has saved my relationship with my parents, and those kinds of people that you can't really get away from, especially if you're underage or still living at home. um because I feel like it was very common for me and my family to get into huge blowout fights over stuff that I wasn't going to change my stand on, and they weren't going to change their stand on either. So as I grow up, I obviously don't want, it's just wasting my time to get into these blowouts. And I've taken on more of a calm stance when I'm trying to explain something. But when it gets to the point that it's something big is going to start, I'm like, it ends here. Like, I'm gonna go back to my room, or like, hey, let's just not talk about it. Like, a very small example is about, I have a lot of tattoos, and every time my mom sees me, she like almost starts to cry, and I'm just like, hey, let's not talk about it. Like, I think I look great, and there's nothing that you can say that's gonna make me feel bad about it. So let's just enjoy our time together because we don't get to see each other a lot. Um, and then what else was I gonna say?
Well,
I was gonna
that is a very valid
yes,
boundary. I think
yes,
sometimes
yes.
people look at that and say, "Oh, I'm retreating, I'm backing out, I'm being a
No,
coward." But
yes.
no, no, that's
No,
not what it is at
yes,
all in
yes.
that
And like
that
yeah,
situation.
and I'll talk with you calmly through anything now. Like I'll explain things to you. You can tell me your side of the story too, as long as we're not like yelling at each other, you know? Which my family is very explosive, so that's a little unavoidable. But yeah, so the other thing that I wanted to talk about is I forgot what my other point was. I think we could just move on.
Well,
It's okay. We're a good community here. We can always come
Yes,
back to
yes.
it.
Okay, okay.
Sorry, Beth. What were you saying?
I got distracted and forgot my final point. If I could butt in with it.
sure.
Sure, go ahead.
Um, if you're the person who someone is coming out to with a disability or something with the LGBT community, don't make receiving that information about your feelings about it.
Mm.
Don't be like, oh,
Mhm.
I'm so sad you're a lesbian. I'll never have grandkids. First of all, it is a new and modern world. We'll figure it out. Second, someone's trusting you with something vulnerable. Let's focus out for a second. And you are allowed to have feelings about it. Process those with someone else, and then come back. And if you need to process feelings, talk to the person. They say, hey, you tell them, you just gave me some information. I'm going to go process. We'll come back and chat later, and actually come back and finish the chat. But also then work through supporting the person in ways that make sense for you as the person who received the information and as the person who gave you the information. I talked a little bit about executive dysfunction and supporting a partner through that. That's one example. If your partner says, I forget how to do the laundry, and your compromise is, okay, well, I can do the first half, and if you can fold it after it gets to the dryer, find ways to work around it.
That's
Mm.
actually the exact agreement that my girlfriend and I have. I'm the
Yes.
folder. I am the folder. She has sensory issues. She does not like to fold clothes, and
Mm.
I do not like to do chores. So folding the clothes while I watch TV is perfect for me.
I love that.
And I think this does highlight too that coming out in a lot of ways, whether you're receiving the information or you're the one who's sharing the information, is ongoing. Carla touched on that, especially here in the South. Talking to your grocery clerk about your girlfriend, that's a form of coming out, is as small and as minor as it is. And so you really don't know where that boundary might be. And it's just a constant effort sometimes to figure out what those boundaries are, but it's very important. I think it's just something that keeps going, though. It's like, trust me, at my age I can tell you there is no finish line. Hate to break it, hate to be the bearer of bad news, y'all, but there is no finish line on that one.
Hmm.
So, Beth, you had touched on something very early on in your answer to our second question, and that was about finding media representation of another individual whose experience represents your experience. But we know that there's a big concern surrounding representation, especially of persons with disabilities and members of the LGBT community. Actually, President Biden was our first president in history to mention persons with disabilities in his inaugural speech, right? So we like to hide persons with disabilities. And although representation of the LGBT community is increasing, we tend to see representation that is still in some way attached to privilege, right? Or to something that's a little softer or more socially acceptable. For example, we tend to see white lesbian women who are represented as a member of the LGBT community. And as I said, we rarely see a person with a visible disability, such as someone using a wheelchair, in media at all. So, how do you feel that this lack of representation impacts the either sexual health or personal experience of persons with disabilities who are also members of the LGBTQ community?
Take your time. I know that.
That's a
This is
lot.
one of my
Sorry
this
about that.
this is one of, no, this is a great question, but it's also one of my soapboxes, and so I have to remember to keep it to my notes, or I will be here for 3 hours ranting. So
That'll be a
representation is
later podcast.
okay. I can rant for hours on this. I trust. Ooh. So representation is important because when we see ourselves in media, we, especially with media on relationships and how we interact with the world, and not just, oh, look, here's a single queer wheelchair user who has great friends and no romantic entanglements or relationships or situationships or whatever you prefer to call them. That doesn't help people feel seen. It doesn't help other people see us as valid or existing or real. And then if there is representation, a lot of times now it's very tokenized. So they will try and put, how many identities can we put on one person, and the rest of the cast will be not minority identities. It's getting better, but there's usually a token. They're like, okay, we can get some race and some ethnicity and maybe a religion and a disability in one character, and none of the others have to have any diversity. Great. And that's really frustrating because they also tend to give us those, I call them digestible people.
Right.
Digestible people. Okay.
Digestible, because white lesbians they're not a threat to masculinity. But they're queer enough. They're usually a little fun, but they also sometimes, depending on the depiction, take on masculine characteristics for the mask leaning lesbians or the butches or the studs, depending on their race. And so, while every person existed having the intersections of some privilege and oppression, if the person that is representing us is like 2/3 privileged or like 89% privileged, that doesn't relate to everyone in the community. And we know that the LGBT community has some intersectional work to do. But there's also sometimes it'll be an able-bodied character playing a disabled person. And that's really frustrating because, shocker, there's disabled actors of all varieties out there. I don't know if they're aware. Maybe someone should memo that to someone. The thing I think about is that there was a Sam Claflin movie, Me and You, with the girl that does Mother of Dragons and Game of Thrones. I clearly don't engage with a lot of media. And everyone's like, oh, this is such a cute love story. And I'm like, is it? Because I've watched it and it's really uncomfortable. And I have not seen anyone who's part of the disabled community, especially mobility users, say that it's a comfortable movie to watch. But he also doesn't use a wheelchair in real life. He did it just for the role. And so he has lots of privileges. And so that was, and there, in the movie, he has lots of privileges. He's like super wealthy. He's this white boy. It's a whole thing. And then sometimes the representation then depicts a harmful stereotype. For example, if you have someone who is cyborg or robotic or robot parts and they're asexual, you enforce this idea that asexual people are robots. When some of the most loving, cuddly people I know in my life are asexuals. I have one friend, I swear she's part cat. If you see her and she likes you, you're getting cuddled. And like, she gets consent, of course, but she's very, very cuddly. And everyone's like, but you're asexual. And she's like, cuddling isn't sexual, it's cuddling. And so, but then if the robot parts are due to a disability or an injury, it's doubly dehumanizing and objectifying. So now it's, oh, well, this person has this robotic arm or this, the Winter Soldier is a great example. I'm sure some of us have been watching Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Bucky is often seen as cold until this show, but until before this show, he was seen as this cold killer, and he has a mechanical arm. And he's seen as very like robotic and not a human, but he is a human. And then when it comes to sexual health, it's rarely inclusive of queer people. It's definitely not disabled inclusive or inclusive of both. We talked a little bit in that first podcast about how there's no condoms that have Braille for their expiration dates. There's some that have indents, but like that's debatable on how you can read it. But for one, there's some good representation of a lot of different identities, but there's a show on Netflix called Sex Education. It's based in Britain. It features some really cool actors, some really cool storylines. But in the second season, and here's a small spoiler warning. Okay. There's an actor who uses a wheelchair in real life, who plays a character who uses a wheelchair in real life, and he is mischievous and adorable, and he's hitting on people, and he's trying to get laid, but it feels very real. And he said that it was fun to play that character because he got to be a teenage boy in a wheelchair, who was not asexual, and he said that was really cool. And we talked before, and if you want to go back to the sex and disability or the gender and disability podcast, we talked about some of the sensory issues that can come with it, communication and access to testing and medication. If the free clinic doesn't have decent access for mobility aid users, or doesn't have a sign language interpreter or someone willing to write back and forth, if they don't have those things there, how can someone get testing and medication when they need it?
It brings up what is representation as well. For instance, you can have characters who have disabilities, whether they're played by a disabled actor or not. Is what is their real experience in life? How many times have we seen them just navigating, someone in a wheelchair navigating through a scene and not being able to get around the coffee table? That never happens. And of course, in movies, everything's perfect. No, nothing ever goes wrong. Nobody trips up the stairs or anything like that. But that is an important element of the life of many people. And representation is always filtered through the lens of making it palatable to what is social acceptable norms. And the benefits of that are, there's some representation, but is it the good representation? Is it the healthy representation? Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
And I think too, is it the real representation? As you mentioned, a person who uses a wheelchair is going to bump into things, and it's not always easy to see that happen to someone, and it's not always easy to know how to respond. And I think a lot of times we shy away from it because we're uncomfortable with our own reaction to it. And of course, movies and advertisers who are in business to make money, they're going to shy away from anything that we're uncomfortable with, right?
Yeah. All of these points were amazing. The only thing I was gonna add is my own experiences with representation, because when I was reading the question, I was thinking about it. I was like, I don't really care about representation anymore, and I think that's just something that I've made myself to feel like, because never in my life have I seen an immigrant character that's also disabled, that's also a lesbian. And then when I do see characters that are, maybe Latino and lesbians, um maybe Latino and disabled or anything like that, like it's never related to me in any way. I don't Obviously there's many different Latin cultures and stuff out there, so it's a little bit difficult to find an exact character out there that really represents you. So I was thinking about it. It's Representation has been such a common topic, especially with all these reboots that are coming out, with, like you were mentioning, like they just gotta put a couple of Black actors in there, they gotta put some disabled actors in there, some gay actors, queer actors, I mean characters, but the actors themselves don't always have that identity themselves, and that's super common with characters that are disabled and the characters that are trans too. Like, it's such a huge problem, and it's just like we're at this point where the actors are there, like disabled actors are there, and they're looking for work all the time, like Black and LGBT, Hispanic, Latino, LGBT, like all of these actors exist, and they're out there auditioning for jobs, but they're not receiving these parts, right? So that's super important to talk about as well. But yeah, nowadays I'm just kind of like, I'm never gonna see it, so why would I care? But it would be nice to actually get a character that is like me in a movie or a TV show. And I've watched a lot of TV shows. Like, if it's a TV show, I've watched it as long as it has no sci-fi in it, because I hate sci-fi.
Ah,
Um,
you mortally wound me.
or apocalypse. I hate apocalypse TV shows.
Mm.
But I've watched a ton of TV shows, and they're all so white, and then if they're not, then they're not. Like, I don't see myself in it ever. But and it's harder, like, say, and for an Afro Latino that's disabled and also part of the LGBT, like, what, I've never even heard of a character that represents that. So yeah.
And Carla, this was actually something that you and I had talked about, like in a personal conversation, but it
Mm-hmm.
inspired our next conversation, which is the impact of environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we know that depending on what identity you associate with, you may experience privilege in one area while you may be marginalized in another area.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, with someone who's a member of the LGBTQ community and also experiences a physical disability, they may find that their doctor's office is fully ADA accessible, but they might not be inclusive of the LGBTQ community. And so, in our conversation, I think it's important to talk about how can we increase inclusivity and accessibility for the persons with disabilities who also identify as members of the LGBTQ community, for not only their sexual health, but also their personal experience as well.
Yeah. One thing that I was gonna mention with this is that the main thing, what you were talking about, like doctors' offices, is that no matter what, if I'm going to a doctor, they're gonna ask me if I'm pregnant or if there's a chance for me to be pregnant, and I'm always like, no, there could be, but there's like I'm monogamous and I have one partner and she's AFAB, so I'll never be pregnant, as I view my life right now. So always I'm always like the first 10 minutes of my conversation with like the nurse or the PA, or the doctor, they're going to ask me this, and then I have to explain and be like, "No, I'm a lesbian and my partner has a vagina." Like I literally have to say, "No, I'm a lesbian and my partner has a vagina and I only have sex with her." Like it has to be super detailed, and I have to give out all these details in my life. And like waste my doctor's appointment time on that. And there's so many other things that other people will experience with that kind of situation. And then when we're talking about environment, like what we were talking about in our previous conversation is that in the United States, I am Latina and I'm an immigrant, and I'm all these other things, but I do experience more privileges than somebody who is Afro Latino and then also identifies as everything else that I do. Thinking about my life back in Peru, and whenever I go back, like I don't have many indigenous features. I'm not Afro Latina, and my family has a lot of European background. Like anyone else who has been there will understand that like I experience white privilege, and I do experience white privilege in the United States as well, but I also experience like ethnocentrism from other people, and like the discrimination that I get in the United States and that I've gotten in the past, it's always about my, when I had an accent or making jokes about being like a cleaning lady or that kind of stuff, but it's never because of my skin color. So that's, and a lot of Latinos get really offended when you're like, no, you're a white Latino, like you just need to understand that, because they're like, I'm not white, I'm not like them. But it's like, yeah, you're not a white American or a white European, but you are white Latino. Like the privileges are there, you're just not experiencing them like a white American or European would be experiencing that. Yeah.
Okay. We're at 45 minutes. So, Shannon, pick one of the final questions. You've got 4, 5, and 6. Pick one, and we'll wrap up with that one.
Well, it's obviously going to be the final thoughts and parting words. I want to know what you guys have.
You can fold some of those elements into the final thought. So, hand it back to you for the final question, whatever you want to make it, Shannon.
And Carla, I love how you are just so self-aware in recognizing where you have experienced discrimination based upon one of the groups that you identify with, but then also where you've experienced privilege. Because intersectionality is very complex. And obviously today we've focused on two marginalized identities, being a member of the LGBTQ community and also being a person with a disability. But in fact, intersectionality is very complex because it includes things like race and class, which obviously have a tremendous impact on a person's experience. And it's difficult always to separate one identity from another and the impact that it has on a person. So I know we got our time warning, so we're going to have to wrap things up here. But Beth and Carla, I'd just like to
I'm a
open it.
evil person.
So, Beth and Carla, I'd just like to open it up to both of you for any final thoughts or parting words that you'd like to share with our audience today.
If Carla doesn't have something ready, I'll go ahead and go first.
You can go first.
Absolutely.
So the first thing I want to talk about is we need to make pride spaces more accessible.
Mm-hmm.
We need to make our parades shorter. We need to make sure there's more places to sit that are designated for those who need them. And we need to continue to also hold virtual prides in some capacity, because that has created the most accessible pride we've ever had. And we need to also, when it comes to healthcare and queerness, we need to get more disabled and queer people in places where they can make those decisions and stop saying, well, how can you be a doctor if blah, blah, blah. Change the spaces to make someone a doctor, create more trainings. Mm-hmm. And then finally, this is more directed to my queer folks, particularly my able-bodied queer folks. We need to continue fighting for marriage equality for our disabled siblings, whether they are cisgender, heterosexual, or queer, because there's a lot of people who, if they become disabled, they cannot get married, or they have to divorce but not actually separate to maintain benefits. And so while the queer fight for marriage equality is over, and I use air quotes with equality, we need to continue fighting to support our disabled siblings in getting their marriage equality as well.
And I'm just going to really hammer that home. And you know, the whole there's an argument to be made about the pros and cons of assimilation, the pros and cons of the marriage institution, but for legal reasons, marriage is a very vital component. And the reason that gay queer marriage became such an issue was directly out of the AIDS crisis, where partners were being kept out of, you know, hospital rooms, kept away from the deathbeds of their loved one they had been with for decades, because they weren't legally married to them. So that's a little bit of the dark history of that, but I think points to the importance of recognizing this. You know, whatever your opinions about marriage in general are, as a legal institution, it's vital. And now, as Beth has said, you know, I have several friends who are in that situation of either have in the process of getting divorced or not planning to get married, because they will lose benefits if they do so because of their disabilities. So, and the support that they get for their disabilities. So, very, very important, Beth. I'm so glad that you brought that up. It's something that I really, you know, hits home for me personally very hard in our community, and how that applies to all of us across all of those lines. So, once again, I'm cutting Carla off on her final thoughts, but I did want to just stress that it's so important. So.
Thank you, KimBoo. You know, there's so much that I want to say, because I'm constantly talking about this kind of stuff like all the time. As I've come out and gotten evaluated for things, like I've I've gained so much security in these identities that I've found. And it's given me a lot of confidence, and you know, I've been able to take that and talk about it more with other people that might not be aware. Like in the office, sometimes parents will assume that I'm not disabled, and then they're talking about their own children who are like autistic or something different, and then they're like, well, you're not like them, you're social. Like I got that from a parent one time, and I was like, I will actually no, I am. Like I definitely am disabled, and you know, I'm just masking. Like every day that I'm here talking to parents like that, like I'm just masking. I've learned how to communicate with them. And I just want people to know that there are people that you can relate to, and you will find someone that you can talk to and feel safe with. Um, and you're also able to keep that kind of information to yourself, like we mentioned before. Acknowledge the safetyness of the environment that you're in. But yeah, I just want people to be talking about this more, if they're comfortable with it, obviously. And it's, you know, I just want medical things to be more accessible, so more people can realize this about themselves and get the, the things that the accommodations that they need, because there's still a lot of people that are not able to do that, that have never even seen a psychologist or anything, or just doctors in general, and are not able to because of the current healthcare situation. So yeah, I just want people to know that people like me are here, and you can always, anyone can talk to me, reach out to me, like if you have any questions or if you just want someone to talk to, like I'll be here, we'll all be here.
I love
Oh,
that. It's we're here, we're queer. Please
mhm.
talk to us.
Yes. And the last thing is, let autistic people be part of administrative, you know groups that are giving out resources to autistic people,
Very
because
good. Yeah.
that's a very huge issue.
Absolutely. And again, Beth and Carla, thank you so much for joining us. As always, it was a tremendous conversation with both of you. And I do just want to reiterate that at the Office of Accessibility Services and the Center for Health and Wellness, we are friendly to the LGBTQ community, and we are also ADA accessible. So you can always turn to us as a resource. We are here to help you. And if we don't have the particular resources that you need at our centers, we will stay with you every step of the way until we find the resources that you do need. So we encourage you to reach out to us if you need anything. And again, thank you, Beth and Carla. You were amazing.
You guys were. Thank you so much, both of you. It's been great.
Thank you, and it's
Thank
nice
y'all
to
for
meet you, Beth.
nice to meet you, Carla, and thank y'all for having me. This is always a blast.
So I just want to thank you, Shannon. Now that we've wrapped up that discussion with Beth and Carla, this was your questions. I always love your questions, and you do so much prep work on these. I just sit back and like hit the record button. It's awesome. But these were really, really thought provoking. I want to let everybody know, and Shannon's probably going to talk about this a little bit more in just a second here. We will be posting a lot of the resources that we talked about here, both on our YouTube channel and on our website, where we'll also have the transcripts and links for that as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. So the one that I'll be including is from the Movement Advancement Project, and it just is a great infographic that really, highlights the discrepancies in the experience of disability among the LGBTQ community, and then highlights some of the current concerns, and also some suggestions for campaigns and promotion of different policies. So that's a great resource. And then I know that Carla and Beth will also be sharing resources that they used in preparation for the conversation today as well.
Yeah, when you talked about that one earlier that you had found, I was like, oh, I need to get my hands on that. So I'm glad we're going to be posting that. So that's the wrap up for this episode. We're going to be going back again, forth again. We're going to do a few more presentation episodes. We will be getting to our interview with our boss, Dr. Jennifer Mitchell, as soon as I get around to putting that on her calendar. So that's on me. I promised Shannon I will do that today, and so we'll have that down the road. But I think that that's a wrap for today. We covered some great topics and some interesting observations from all involved. We look forward to presenting you more information as we go along the line. But in the meantime, it's OAS is OUT out. Bye. Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Access FSU. Did you find it interesting, helpful, insightful? Please let us know by emailing our office at oas@fsu.edu. We are always looking for feedback on issues and suggestions for future episodes. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast app, including iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. For more information about the Office of Accessibility Services at Florida State University, visit our website at https://dss.fsu.edu/OAS. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today.